The system of the United States government is built upon the shared power and responsibilities of its separate branches. But who holds the institution of government accountable? And what role, if any, does the common citizen have in the operation of our government? Discover the forgotten and astonishing story of our nation's foundation in the American Heritage series. For centuries, Americans were taught a truthful view of history that recognized the godly heroes and moral foundation our nation was founded upon. But in recent years, a new version of history has assaulted the moral and spiritual fiber of our nation, leaving the truth of our past eliminated and forgotten until today. Join historian David Barton and experience the untold story of our nation's history in the American Heritage series.
When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. But in America, neither the righteous nor the wicked rule unless we put them there.
The United States government was founded upon the principle of shared power and responsibility between its separate branches.
This is a stewardship blessing that He has given us, and He will hold us accountable for it.
But what role, if any, does the common citizen have in the operation of government?
If you want to be spiritually mature, start getting involved and stay involved when you're not inspired to, when you don't feel like it, when nobody appreciates what you do. Get in there and do it because it's the right thing to do.
And who did the Founding Fathers intend to hold our government accountable for its actions? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
The greatest force that has shaped American culture and institutions has been biblical Christianity. But it's not been a passive biblical Christianity, it's been an active biblical Christianity.
Right.
What has to happen in today's generation is we've got to get an active Christianity going again.
Right.
If you look at what Jesus Himself teaches in Matthew 11:12, He says that the kingdom of heaven will be taken by active, energetic folks, not passive folks. We have so many scriptures throughout the Bible that tell us to be engaged, to be involved. A great example in 2 Kings 7, they said, why sit we here till we die?
Right.
I mean, why do we just sit here and do nothing? And they were letting things come in around them. You have David who rose up and said, is there not a cause? You know, how come nobody's going out and taking on Goliath? Isn't there a reason to do something? We have reasons galore, but we need people to stand up, get moving, get engaged, and get active. Jesus has a very clear directive in Luke 19:13. Whatever your view is, you got to deal with this. Jesus says, occupy till I come.
Wow.
That's not optional. I mean, that takes every area of eschatology and puts it right there. If you think He's coming back tonight, or if you think He's not coming back till you subdue the earth, doesn't matter. You occupy till He comes. Most citizens believe that the Constitution governs America, but it doesn't. During the Constitutional Convention, while they were framing the Constitution, they had a discussion over what the impact of the Constitution would be in limiting the misconduct of public officials. I think the discussion was best summed up by Delegate John Francis Mercer, who declared,
"It is a great mistake to suppose that the paper we are to propose will govern the United States. It is the men whom it will bring into the government and interest they have in maintaining it that are to govern them. The paper will only mark out the mode and the form. Men are the substance and must do the business."
In other words, we have a Constitution that gives us the power to elect our leaders. But if we elect the wrong kind of leaders, the Constitution will be absolutely worthless in their hands. The key to good government is not how good our documents are, it's how good our laws are. It's how good our leaders are. In America, whether the righteous rule or whether the wicked rule depends totally upon the will of the voters. We have our choice. To have been given the power to determine the quality of our government and its leaders, and then not to use that power, is reminiscent of the servant who received a trust from the master and then decided not to do anything with it, not to get involved. Remember that none of the servants asked for the trust they received from the master, but the master gave it to them anyway, and they became responsible to the master for what they did with that trust, despite the fact they had not asked for it. Similarly, we did not ask to be born in America. We did not ask to be given a government of which we're the stewards. Nevertheless, the Master has given it to us, and He will call us to account for our stewardship of this important trust. Very simply, if our culture is moving the wrong way in America, it's because of Christian non-involvement. James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, pointed this out a century ago. He said,
Now, more than ever before, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be ignorant, reckless, and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. If it be intelligent, brave, and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities to represent them in the national legislature. If the next centennial does not find us a great nation, it will be because those who represent the enterprise, the culture, and the morality of the nation do not aid in controlling the political forces.
if we're going to change our culture, what do we do first of all? I think we follow biblical instructions. The first instruction we're given in the Bible in relation to civil government, civil arenas, deals with 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 and 2. We're told that first of all, we should pray for leaders and those in authority. Now, that phrase, first of all, that's a killer phrase. There's nothing else in the Bible for which we're told to pray first of all. So God says, first thing I want you doing when you pray is pray for leaders and those in authority.
Wow.
Newsflash, Christians, if you're praying first of all for your family, for your ministry, for whatever else if you're not doing first of all prayer for leaders and those in authority, you're not praying biblically. So if God thinks that is an institution that we should pray for first of all, it kind of tells us that He probably puts a priority on that institution. So why would we say, oh, I don't need to get involved in civil affairs? Well, that's the first thing on His prayer list, is pray for leaders and those in authority. But there's a great quote from John Hancock, who was an early founding father, very strong Christian, very evangelical. We've looked at some of his proclamations that are Jesus Christ oriented. He says, I urge you, by all that's holy, by all that's honorable, not only that you pray, but also that you act.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to do. I mean, praying is really good. Interesting thing about prayer, once you start praying for something, you'll start wanting to get involved with it. That's a problem. If you ever start praying for missions around the world, you want to go some places and do some things.
Right.
So once you turn your heart toward praying for it, you turn your heart toward getting active in it. God says, first of all, pray for leaders and those in authority. It would not have surprised Dr. Benjamin Rush to learn that our academic achievements have fallen significantly since the secularization of public education. For he had long ago observed,
there is the most knowledge in those countries where there is the most Christianity. And those parents or schoolmasters who neglect the religious instruction of their children and pupils reject and neglect the most effectual means of promoting knowledge in our country.
the successful philosophy of education that characterized America for centuries has undergone a revolution in recent years. A revolution not by citizen action or legislative interference, but rather by judicial activism, with courts and judges suddenly prohibiting what had been permissible for centuries. Secularization of education is the new order of the day, but recent decades clearly demonstrate that the more secular our public schools become, the less successful they are academically. Unfortunately, too many today are unaware of the massive and dramatic changes that have recently occurred in American education, and too many others are simply complacent. Yet it is important that every citizen today, whether they have students in school or not, be concerned about the condition of education. As educator Noah Webster warned long ago,
the education of youth should be watched with the most scrupulous attention. It is much easier to introduce and establish an effectual system than to correct by penal statutes the ill effects of a bad system. The education of youth lays the foundations on which both law and gospel rest for success.
every citizen should exert the time and effort necessary to ensure that schools are teaching sound content and providing a good education, and that those who teach in the classrooms, as well as those elected to school boards and legislatures, are individuals who respect, honor, and embrace the time-tested principles of a sound education. And if the leaders in schools you work with will not do so, then replace the leaders or start new schools. Remember, imparting mere academic knowledge should never be a sufficient final objective for learning, nor should the secularization of education ever become acceptable. A sound education should instill the three elements long proven to be the basis of a successful education, the three elements of religion, morality, and knowledge. These elements should be instilled in our schools, but they should also be instilled at home, at church, and throughout our communities.
The United States government was founded upon the principle of shared power and responsibility between its separate branches. But what role, if any, does the common citizen have in the operation of government? And who did the Founding Fathers intend to hold our government accountable for its actions? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
Now, what can we do as citizens to change our culture? First off, we got to change the way we think.
Right.
We have this thing that says, you know, America's got nearly 300 million people. I'm just one in this huge nation of people. I can't make a difference. As long as we think like that, we won't make a difference. Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If that's your view, is that you can't make a difference, then you're going to sit there and not make it. You got to change your view. You can make a difference. And you see, that's not even optional about whether you can make a difference. There's a great story where the disciples come to Jesus in Luke 17, and they say, Lord, increase our faith. That's a great spiritual request. His answer is pretty interesting. His answer, he tells them a parable that you say, what does that have to do with increasing faith? He said, let me tell you this story. He said, there's a man who was tending sheep. He was taking care of sheep, and I have to say, growing up in Texas, I grew up farming and ranching. I took care of sheep, hundreds of sheep, hundreds of goats. I took care. And the fact that we're called sheep in the Bible is not good news. That's got to be one of the dumbest animals in the world. I mean, it says great things about the shepherd. The fact that we're sheep says great stuff about him. If he can handle us, he's done really well. But the fact that when you're a shepherd, you take care of sheep, you have to mess with them from what we call can see to can't see, from sun up to sundown. I mean, it's a day long. And chasing those silly things around, well, you deal with them. That's hard work. Then the servant came in. And the servant got there, and the master said, I'm hungry. Feed me. Take care of me. Wait on me for a while. This guy's worn out from a hard day's work, and now he takes care of the master, and so he has to wait on him and feed him and serve him. And after it's all done, the master doesn't even say thank you. And so here's this servant who's worked his tail off, and then after he got really tired, he worked some more, and nobody's even told him thank you. And the response, and this is what Jesus gave us the response, he says, I'm an unprofitable servant. I've done that which is my duty to do. He wasn't looking for thanks. He wasn't looking for results. They say, Lord, increase our faith. He says, let me tell you this story about doing your duty. Let me tell you this story about getting involved and staying involved when you don't feel like being involved, when nobody says thank you for being involved.
That's good, dude.
See, the thing is, if you want to be spiritually mature, start getting involved and stay involved when you're not inspired to, when you don't feel like it, when nobody appreciates what you do. Get in there and do it because it's the right thing to do. What legacy will we leave the next generation? Many argue that the next generation is not our concern, for Christ will return before that. But it's important to recall that every generation since Christ was on earth has believed that Christ would return in their generation. So far, they've all been wrong. But nonetheless, we're told in 1 Thessalonians 5:2 to expect His return as a thief in the night. Yet regardless of what our eschatology might be, Jesus has clearly told us all in Luke 19:13 to occupy until He comes. Therefore, we should heed the warning delivered to citizens in 1803 when the Reverend Matthias Burnett charged,
Finally, ye whose high prerogative it is to invest with office and authority, or to withhold them, and in whose power it is to save or destroy your country, consider well the important trust which God has put into your hands. To God and posterity, you are accountable for them. Let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which your fathers delivered to you.
it's time for Christians to re-engage in civil stewardship from a biblical viewpoint, a viewpoint long understood by previous generations. It's time for Christians again to become salt and light in every arena of society, including the civil arena, and to influence society through acts as simple as voting. Indeed, the Bible reminds us that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. But the righteous can't rule unless some of the qualified ones are willing to run for office, and unless the rest of us are willing to get out and elect them when they do run. Psalms 33:12 declares that blessed is that nation whose God is the Lord, and if America does not stay blessed, it will be because Christians did not stay involved. So let's get involved. Let's make a positive difference in America again.
It's almost like the key to this is occupy till I come.
That's it.
The words of Christ Himself. And whether we think there's a lot of work to be done, or we're supposed to stand ye gazing. Christ's words trump all of that by
That's
saying
right.
occupy till we
That's
come.
right.
So we got to get in the game, kind of.
Well, we got to get in the game. Our founding fathers had a concept of stewardship that I think we need to recapture. And they saw stewardship in the form of every blessing that had been given them, civil, religious, family, otherwise. And if you look at what happened in Matthew 25 and Luke 19, the parables we have of the minas and the talents, it's the minas in Luke and it's the talents in Matthew. The master calls the servants together, Christ calls everybody together, says, okay, I'm giving you this and this and this, and you take care of it till I come back. So he takes off. At some later point in time, he comes back. He says, all right, it's accounting time. So one, in Luke 19, the minas, he took one, gave it to this guy. This guy had taken it, and he kept it really well. Didn't lose anything. Nothing was gone from what he was given, but he didn't increase anything. And the master says, out. You know, the very first command God gave was multiply. I mean, that's the very first thing. And that's what he said. He said, you could have at least put it in the bank and made some interest on it, 2-3%. You know, I mean, maybe you didn't turn it into 5-fold and 10-fold like the other guys, but you should have had some increase.
Right.
You just sat there with it and held it. You haven't done a thing with it. And, you know, it's not sufficient to not lose what we've been given. We're supposed to expand, increase, and multiply. And that guy was faithful to keep what he'd been given, but he didn't expand it. He didn't increase it, didn't have any further influence, and he got in trouble. Now, the next guy has the 1. He turns it into 5. The next guy has the 1, he turns it into 10. So the way the founding fathers, and by the way, here's another interesting little thing for our Christian mentality today. We often look at those passages and we note the fact that the master says to him, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of the Lord, which he does. And we think that's a really cool verse and we want to be faithful and enter in the joy of the Lord. We also miss something else he told those. The one who had taken the 1 turned it into 5, the one who had taken the 1 turned it into 10. He said, well done, good and faithful servant. You've taken 1, turned it into 5. I'm going to make you a ruler over 5 cities. And this one he says, I'm going to make you a ruler over 10 cities. We go, wait a minute, time out. You mean if I'm really faithful to what God's given me, if I take and increase it, he wants to reward me by putting me in civil government? That's not a reward. That's the way we think today. He thought it was a reward, which also tells you how highly he thinks about civil government, that those who do really well with what he's given, he wants to put them in a civil arena.
Wow.
Now, having said that, you go back to this, the way the founders would view this, real simple. We're going to stand before God someday. He's going to say, I gave you your life. What'd you do with your life? Well, Lord, I did exactly what you said. First off, I committed my soul to you, but you also said he that wins souls is wise, so I led other people, and I went through, well done, good and faithful servant. He says, I gave you your family. What'd you do with that? Well, Lord, I did exactly what you said. I loved my wife. I respected my husband. I brought my children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I did everything. Well done, good and faithful servant. He says, I gave you your possessions. What'd you do with your possessions? Well, Lord, I tithed, just like you said, but I even went further and I did the offerings you talked about. I helped the widows and the orphans in their affliction. I did James 1:26. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And then he says, I gave you your government. What'd you do with that? Oh, Lord, I decided not to get involved in that one.
Wow.
Not optional. You know what's significant about that entire parable is none of the servants asked for the stewardship they'd been given. None of them said, I want 1, I want 5. He gave to every one of them. And that's what one of those servants says. I didn't ask for this. Why are you holding me accountable? See, that's where we are with America. We may not have asked for this nation. We may not have asked for this government. But he's going to ask us about it.
Wow.
He's going to say, what did you do with that government I gave you? Well, I sat at home and I didn't vote and I didn't care about politics. This is not optional. This is a stewardship blessing that he has given us, and he will hold us accountable for it.
The United States government was founded upon the principle of shared power and responsibility between its separate branches. But what role, if any, does the common citizen have in the operation of government? And who did the Founding Fathers intend to hold our government accountable for its actions? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
As citizens, we must vote righteously. And by the way, this first assumes that we are voting. This responsibility to vote and to vote righteously has been made clear from generation to generation. One such voice heralding this responsibility was that of Charles Finney. Finney was a famous American revivalist, a leader in the American revival movement called the Second Great Awakening. He was also the president of a college that even decades before the Civil War admitted both black and white students as equals. In fact, the students from the college where Reverend Finney was president not only became some of the most active conductors of the Underground Railroad, but also started several of America's black colleges and universities. Reverend Finney wisely admonished,
The time has come that Christians must vote for honest men and take consistent ground in politics. Christians have been exceedingly guilty in this manner, but the time has come when they must act differently. Christians seem to act as if they think God does not see what they do in politics, but I tell you, He does see it, and He will bless or curse this nation according to the course Christians take in politics.
so when voting, no vote should be cast solely on the basis of any party. The values of each individual candidate must be examined. An illustration of this important principle is seen in the life of Dr. Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration who worked with the Reverend Richard Allen to found the AME Church. Dr. Rush served in the presidential administrations of 3 different presidents, each of whom was from a different political party. How could he do this? What was his own party affiliation? He once explained,
I have been alternately called an aristocrat and a Democrat. I am neither. I am a Christocrat. I believe all power will always fail of producing order and happiness in the hands of man. He alone who created and redeemed man is qualified to govern him.
very simply, Benjamin Rush didn't care what a party called itself. When he found someone who stood for God's principles, he would stand with him, no matter the party. The love of correct principles, and not the love of a party, must be the key to our political involvement. Frederick Douglass, who served as a minister of the gospel, had agreed, declaring,
I have one great political idea. That idea is an old one, is widely and generally assented to. Nevertheless, is very generally trampled upon and disregarded. The best expression of it I found in the Bible. It is in substance, righteousness exalteth a nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. Now this constitutes my politics, the negative and positive of my politics, and the whole of my politics. I feel it my duty to do all in my power to infuse this idea into the public mind that it may be practiced.
Douglass was right. As citizens, we must vote righteously. And by the way, this first assumes that we are voting. This responsibility to vote and to vote righteously has been made clear from generation to generation.
The scripture says, Proverbs 29:2, that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. But in America, neither the righteous nor the wicked rule unless we put them there. If it's the wicked that's ruling, how'd they get there? See, this is a difficulty we have. The Christian community is one of the smallest voting blocks in the nation, although we're one of the largest groups in the nation. If you look back in recent elections, you'll find that among evangelical Christians, and evangelical is defined in polling as those who are serious about their faith.
Wow.
Those who are really serious. 25% of evangelicals are voting. That's 1 out of 4. That means 3 out of 4 Bible-believing Christians refuse to be salt and light in the civil arena. They refuse to help the righteous rule. They want to see the wicked rule, apparently, because they sit at home and don't do anything. Well, they say, well, I don't know who to vote for. Real simple. Go to our website. We have links to voting records of these guys. We have links to their positions. It's very easy to find. It's not an excuse, but there's web sources you can go to. And if you're wondering about whether to re-elect someone to office, real simple. The U.S. government keeps a record of everything your representative, your senator, has said and done while in office. So if you go to the Library of Congress website, you can type in your representative's name. It'll bring up all the speeches he gave. You can see what he said about abortion, what he said about marriage, what he said. It'll bring up all his votes on any issue. If you want to know exactly what's his position on Israel, type in Israel, bring up the stuff he did on Israel. Easy to know. Easy to hold these guys accountable. Now, we need to, because in any given session of Congress, a congressman deals with between 10 and 13,000 bills a session.
Wow.
I'll guarantee you most citizens only hear 4, 5, or 6 things that a congressman does. Need to go back and see. It's easy to do in this environment, in this age. You can find out. So we need to be informed, we need to be active, And we need to find a spot and get involved. Passive Christianity will not turn this nation back around. It will not change the culture. It will not improve our educational system. It will not improve the media environment and the type of things that come out of Hollywood. It's not going to change the courts until we start getting back involved. We've got to start thinking about the next generation.
Right.
Because, I'll tell you quite frankly, I hope Christ comes back today and screws up every plan I've got, you know. But just in case he doesn't, what do I do for the next generation?
Right.
You know, every generation since Christ was here 2,000 years ago thought he was going to return in their generation. So far, they've all been wrong.
Right.
What if we're another generation and he doesn't return in our generation?
Right.
So that's why it doesn't matter what your eschatology is. The Scripture says, occupy till I come. He's going to come like a thief in the night. Scripture says that. I don't know when it is. It doesn't matter when it is.
Right.
That's not my responsibility.
Right.
Correct.
My responsibility is occupy till he comes. And you can't decide not to be involved in this.
Right.
That's what the Scripture clearly teaches. So America's had a great foundation. It's had great roots. It has had such blessings, but it's been because of an active Christianity. There is a great example of how to do this in the book of Nehemiah. Because in the book of Nehemiah, you had a city that once had been great, that's now torn down. It is rubble everywhere. It's almost like, man, thousands of stones. Which one do I pick up to start rebuilding the wall? And what you find in the book of Nehemiah is that literally, and in that case they were literally rebuilding a wall as stonemasons.
Right.
Who's doing it? Well, if you read the book, you find that a jeweler is out there laying stones. You find that a military guy is out there, a man and his daughters is out there, a perfume maker's out there. These are folks aren't qualified to lay stones. Doesn't matter. They all got involved in doing something. Because when they looked at that, they said, we'll never get this done. And Nehemiah says, yeah, we can do this. Just go find a place to rebuild. And so you find that everyone got involved in doing something. The men of Tekoa built huge sections of the wall. The priests only rebuilt their own home. But you know what? That was a section of the wall. That was part of what has to... So you look around you, and it's not that I can solve the marriage problem or I can solve the religious liberty. Just find something going on and get involved with it. If everybody gets involved, after that whole group got involved, within 52 days they had the whole wall back. They were shocked at how fast it went up because it looked so intimidating when they started. It's where we are in America.
Right.
We got a ton of problems to address, and so we sit back and don't do anything because we don't know which one to go after. It doesn't matter. Follow your heart. God will lead you where you need to go. Get involved in something. It may be a crisis pregnancy center. It may be a tutoring system for schools. It may be helping someone fill out their job resume. You don't know what it is, but if everybody does something, this thing will get back in a hurry. And that's what we need, is everybody getting involved, doing something on the wall, rebuilding the wall in some way. You may not even feel qualified for what you're doing, but if you get involved, if you'll give some time, if you give some energy, some effort, this thing will get turned around.
For more information on the American Heritage Series, or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.